My name is Santiago Gonzalez, and I'm excited to bring to you the topic of ergonomics. Ergonomics are everywhere we go, in every business, in every organization, at UAMS, because it is very, very important for workers and the organizations in terms of safety, in terms of health, and in terms of productivity, which is in terms of businesses, they increase profits, and in terms of organizations such as hospitals, they help teams perform a better job. So they're extremely important and they're applicable to what we do. Ergonomics are also known as human factors, and according to the International Ergonomics Association, the official definition is that it involves the design and evaluation of tasks, jobs, products, environments, and systems in order to make them compatible with the needs, abilities, and limitations of people. It's basically about fitting the workplace to the worker and not all the other way around. Now let's talk about ergonomics in terms of its history and how long it's been around. Ergonomics can be traced back to the Greek civilization in the 5th century BC. They applied principles in their tools, jobs, and workplaces. Even some of the writings of Hippocrates outline the most ergonomic way of how a surgeon's workplace should be arranged so that the surgeon can work better, so that the surgeon can be more effective. So once again, it's about fitting the workplace, in this case, the surgeon's tools, to the surgeon and not the other way around. Now, continuing on the history, in the 19th century, it was applied to industrial processes in various industries in Russia. So it was seen how it could actually be applied to large businesses and factories of the time. In World War I, they started applying ergonomics in ways that they designed planes to fit the pilots. So the pilots told them, this is what we want, this is where we want our displays, this is where we want our controls. And they designed the planes according to what the pilots wanted. So that helped the pilots do a better job. Now moving on to World War II, there was a huge increase in the investment they put into ergonomics because of the success it had back in World War I. And they started taking into account not only the preferences in terms of where they wanted, like their controls and so on, like physically per se, but now they started taking into account the cognitive strengths and weaknesses of the soldiers. We can't think of soldiers or humans as machines. So they started thinking and adding the factor of humans to the equation, which makes perfect sense to us. Now, in the digital age, the study of ergonomics was at the forefront of how we interact with computers, how we interact with our phones, what is the best way that it's pleasant to our eyes, and how we can better understand the technology in front of us so that it can actually be useful to us. So, what type of areas of knowledge are actually a part of ergonomics? And ergonomics is not a science by itself. It's actually composed of many basic sciences and social sciences, such as sociology, psychology, engineering, biomechanics, industrial design, physiology, graphic design, and user interface design. So it's basically encompassing all aspects of the human and its perspective and how it behaves in terms of its bodily functions, in terms of how a human thinks. So it's really about designing our environment, once again, to fit the workers, to fit the people. So why are ergonomics important? What are the goals of ergonomics? One is to promote occupational health. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth in each of these. Prevents occupational injuries and increases productivity and profit, which is very important for all businesses, whether they're for-profit or non-profit organizations. They need to be able to create revenue. They need to be able to be effective so that they can continue to do the work that they're doing. and for their organizations to remain in place. So there are three types of ergonomics: physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics, and organizational ergonomics. And as you can see, once again, it is taking a holistic approach to a worker, to a human being, and it's encompassing its physical characteristics, its cognitive abilities, and how humans interact with each other in organizations. So now we're going to talk about each of these and how they help the goals that we had mentioned of promoting health, preventing injuries, and increasing productivity. Now, physical ergonomics. It takes into account the anatomy and biomechanics to figure out the safest and most effective way for workers to do their job. These are things such as working postures, repetitive movements, workplace layout, and the handling or transporting of materials. As you can possibly imagine, if we don't take into account these characteristics of our nature as human beings, we will lead to things such as injuries and other sorts of problems that would take us away from work. So some of those injuries are carpal tunnel syndrome, rotator cuff injuries, and muscle strains and low back injuries. So here we see the top 10 leading causes of disabling workplace injuries in 2012 by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. As you can see, the leading cause is overexertion. Some of the other ones are repetitive motions involving microtask. They could be like exertions that are not in a way healthy for the human being and that are not taking into account our proper posture and our proper handling of materials. So these are the statistics that are extremely important for us to take into account. 1.8 million U.S. workers every year experience work-related musculoskeletal disorders. As you can imagine, this causes a huge impact economically and in terms of the productivity that a worker could have in a workplace. Now, 600,000 of those injuries are so serious that the workers miss work. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, musculoskeletal problems accounted for 33% of all worker injury and illness cases. As you can see, the topic of physical ergonomics is extremely important, and for any sort of job, regardless of where it's at or what they do, they need to take into account the physical health of their workers. This is an example of ergonomics and how it can be applied even to the way that we are in our sitting position while we work. So on the left side here, you see how the neck, shoulder, and low back are not aligned. You could imagine that that would lead to neck pain, back pain, and here in the middle and in the right side, those two figures are showing how there's proper alignment. They're taking into account proper distance to the screen so that there's not any eye strain. So these are all things that are extremely important. And you might think, hey, this won't really matter. But if you do it every day, let's say for the average worker, 8 hours for a whole week, that's 40 hours a week that you're doing this type of behavior, that could possibly lead to lots of musculoskeletal disorders in the long term. Let's say after 5 years of working at a desk and doing this type of bad posture, it does lead to the problems we previously talked about. Now let's move on to cognitive ergonomics. It reconciles the worker's psychological and cognitive processes with the working environment to maintain a positive, efficient, and optimal environment to work. Basically, it once again takes into account that human beings are moved by motivation, by our perspective on things, by the way that we perceive our reality. And mental processes such as memory, reasoning, all of those things go into play whenever you're asking a worker to do a specific job. And like the extent in which we take into account these strengths and limitations have a huge impact in the type of performance that that worker has. So let's continue to dig a little deeper in cognitive ergonomics. So you can see, once again, it encompasses many, many things like human psychology, cognitive science, consumer sciences, neuroscience, and it applies it to the workplace so that workers can be more productive. Organizational ergonomics takes into account things like teamwork, communication, and cooperation. As you can imagine, if a company is not organized correctly, there might be too much work on someone in a specific subset of the organization, and in others they might not be working as hard. So in either way, you're not reaching the maximum, capacity of each worker in each office within an organization. So it's, once again, taking into account all of these things to maximize performance. So this is the perspective of OSHA on ergonomics enforcement. In fact, taking into account these things, especially the physical ergonomics, is the law. So, quote, as an employer, you have an obligation under the General Duty Clause to keep your workplace free from recognized hazards, including ergonomic hazards. And these hazards will be cited by OSHA, and they will have to be, companies will have to pay fees for not following specific ergonomic principles. So let's move on to who has applied OSHA's principles and ergonomic principles to their companies, and they have been extremely successful. Some of these companies we all know. Companies such as Tyson, Duracell, the New York Times, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and basically all large companies that understand the importance of taking into account the needs, the strengths, and the limitations of their workers. So let's dig a deeper in the success stories. For example, LL Bean, after redesigning the company's workstations, the lost time incidents due to musculoskeletal disorders were reduced by 79%. In Intel, after 10 years of incorporating an ergonomics program in the entire corporation, the recordable rate and lost day case rate of ergonomics related injuries has decreased approximately 95%. All of these are showing how even these huge companies are getting a very, very amazing and significant benefit of implementing ergonomics to their companies. And it means that workers are healthier, that they're happier, that they are less likely to quit because of the job. You're less likely to be sued as a company for not taking into account these things. And you're maximizing profits and maximizing performance. So, extremely important. So, it sounds really, really good. So, how do we implement ergonomics? And these are some of the things that are talked about by OSHA. So, some of those things are to provide management support, to involve the workers, to provide training, and identify problems. Involving the workers, as you can imagine, is extremely important in the ergonomic process. They can help us identify problems, they can identify hazards with a better perspective than anyone else because they're being exposed to these hazards on a daily basis. Another thing is to, once again, for them to report these injuries and to implement solutions. And once we implement those solutions, to evaluate our progress. Now, these are the references I used There's lots of information online. Ergonomics are very, very, very successful in what they have shown since they were implemented in large companies. And if you have more questions about it and you would like to have more information, please visit these websites. One of the ones that I found the most information in was the official International Ergonomics Association website and the official OSHA website in the specific topic of ergonomics. If you have any other questions as well, you can email me. This is my school email. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And I wish you guys the best of luck with all of your future endeavors. Thank you very much for your attention and have a wonderful day. Hello everyone, my name is Santiago Gonzalez and I'm excited to bring to you